My name is Ella Simmons. I'm 33 years old, and until a few weeks ago, I believed my life was stable in the way that mattered. Not perfect, but structured, predictable, earned. I work as a delivery driver in Columbus, Ohio. Most of my days start early. I load the truck around 6 o'clock in the morning and spend hours moving packages across different parts of the city. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, clear. Things either get delivered or they don't. I've always liked that kind of certainty. Ethan Carter is 29, my fiancé. He works in marketing for a regional healthcare group. Confident, social, the kind of man who can walk into a room and immediately belong there. He knows how to adjust himself depending on who's watching and expects people to adjust back. We had been together a little over 3 years, living together for 1.5. The apartment is technically mine. I signed the lease before we met, but we split everything evenly. Rent, utilities, groceries, it felt fair. We were planning a small wedding for next fall. Nothing extravagant, just stable. On the surface, our life made sense. My job kept me out most of the day. Ethan worked regular hours, usually home before me. Evenings were quiet, dinner, sometimes a movie, weekends with friends. It should have been enough. But there was always something just slightly off. Her name was Gabriella, Ethan's ex-girlfriend. According to him, they dated for a couple of years before breaking up shortly before we met. He described it as mutual, clean, mature, just two people realizing they were better off as friends. At first, I didn't question it. People have history. That part wasn't the problem. The problem was how present that history still felt. Gabriella's name came up more often than it should have. Small comments at first, places she liked, stories about things they used to do, comparisons that didn't quite sound like comparisons, but felt like them anyway. She used to love this place. Gabriella always understood my schedule. Gabriella never made a big deal out of things like that. The first time I pointed it out, Ethan laughed. Not aggressively, just dismissively, like I had said something mildly ridiculous. Confident women don't get bothered by things like that, Ella. So I let it go. At least I tried to. But over the next few months, I started noticing patterns. He still met her for coffee, every couple of weeks, always casual, always harmless, according to him. And every time I questioned it, even slightly, the response was the same. I was overthinking, overreacting, reading into things that weren't there. It wasn't dramatic, just enough to make me pay attention. Then about 2 weeks ago, something shifted. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Dinner was simple, leftovers from the night before. My phone was face down next to my plate. His was in his hand. He barely looked up when he said it. It's kind of cute how jealous you get when I see Gabriella. I didn't respond right away. He smirked slightly, like he was amused by his own observation. Then he added, almost casually, honestly, reactions like that just make it obvious you're not really wife material yet. More like practice. The sentence landed quietly. No raised voice. No argument. Just clarity. I remember staring at my plate for a second longer than usual. Then I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. I finished dinner, rinsed my plate, put it in the rack. We went to bed at the same time we always did. I still had a truck to load at 6 o'clock in the morning. From the outside, nothing changed. But internally, everything did. I did not argue with Ethan that night. There was no point. People always think the end of something sounds dramatic when it happens. Raised voices, doors slamming, one person crying while the other storms out. But sometimes the real ending is quieter than that. Sometimes it happens in the exact second you realize someone has finally said the honest thing out loud. The next morning, I loaded my truck like always. 6 o'clock. Cold air, clipboard, scanner, a row of packages waiting to be sorted by route. My hands moved on habit. My mind did not. Delivery work gives you too much time to think. Long stretches of traffic, red lights that hold you in place, silence between stops that feels heavier when something inside you has already shifted. By mid-morning, I had replayed Ethan's voice enough times that the sentence no longer sounded like a joke. Not wife material. Practice. The words themselves were ugly enough. But it was the ease in his tone that stayed with me. Like he wasn't even trying to hurt me. Like he genuinely believed I was supposed to hear something humiliating and accept it as normal. By the time I stopped for lunch, I had made a decision so quietly it almost didn't feel like a decision at all. I was not going to fight over Gabriella. I was not going to defend whether I was worthy of being someone's wife. I was simply going to stop moving forward with a man who saw me that way. The first thing I did was open the notes app on my phone. Ethan liked talking about the wedding. Ideas, colors, playlists, food. But I was the one keeping track of the details. Deposit amounts, contact names, tentative dates, vendor numbers, Follow-up reminders. I've always been better at the practical side of things. If something matters, I write it down. I keep it organized. I know where everything is. So while sitting in the truck with a sandwich in one hand, I started making calls. The venue coordinator answered first. I kept my voice even and said we needed to cancel the tentative reservation. She asked if everything was all right. I told her plans had changed and we wouldn't be moving forward. She sounded sympathetic in that polished, professional way people do when they've heard enough broken engagement voices to recognize one immediately. The small deposit wouldn't be refunded. That was fine. I expected that. The photographer Ethan liked was next. That conversation was easier. We had only scheduled a consultation, so there wasn't much to undo. Then the caterer. Then the florist I had saved, even though we hadn't officially booked her yet. One by one, the future Ethan still thought he had was disappearing in small, ordinary phone calls made from the driver's seat of my truck. No scene. No audience. Just me pressing end call and moving to the next number. It should have felt sad. Instead, it felt precise, like tightening a bolt, like closing a gate. That evening, Ethan came home smelling faintly of coffee and city air. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door and started talking about something that happened at work. A client meeting, a joke someone made, a campaign that needed last-minute revisions. I listened enough to respond when necessary. Then, almost predictably, Gabriella's name slid into the conversation. Apparently, she had texted him that morning because she'd passed a cafe they used to go to together, and it reminded her of some trip they took years ago. Ethan told the story with that same easy tone people use when they expect to be indulged. Then he glanced at me and smiled. Not warmly, not lovingly, more like he was checking to see whether I would react. "You okay?" he asked. "You get kind of quiet whenever her name comes up." I looked at him across the kitchen, at his relaxed face, at the confidence in it, at the assumption that my silence meant I was still trying to prove something to him. And for one brief second, I saw the whole relationship differently. Not as a romance falling apart, as a pattern. Every time something hurt me, he renamed it. If I was uncomfortable, I was insecure. If I noticed a boundary being crossed, I was jealous. If I asked for respect, I was overreacting. And if he insulted me, it became humor. That's how he kept control of the story, by making sure my pain always sounded less valid than his version of events. I said, "I'm fine," and turned back to my food. He seemed satisfied with that. Of course he did. He still thought we were having the same conversation we'd been having for months. He thought this was another round of him pushing and me absorbing it. He didn't realize there was no argument anymore because there was no relationship to defend. Over the next few days, I kept handling things quietly. There's a specific kind of calm that comes when a hard decision is already made. Not happiness, not relief exactly, just the absence of confusion. For months, I had been living inside a low-grade irritation I kept trying to explain away. After his comment, the irritation vanished. Clarity replaced it. I noticed things more sharply after that. The way Ethan checked his reflection in dark windows when we walked past them. The way he liked saying provocative things, then leaning back and judging my reaction instead of his own behavior. The way he talked about maturity like it was something he naturally possessed and I was still trying to earn. I also noticed how rarely he apologized. Not really. He would smooth things over, reframe them, turn them into misunderstandings. But actual accountability? That was different. That required humility. And humility had never been one of Ethan's stronger instincts. 2 mornings later, before starting my route, I stopped by the jewelry store. The ring wasn't enormous, not flashy, but it mattered. I had bought it 5 months earlier from a local jeweler downtown. The woman behind the counter recognized me immediately. That's the thing about smaller stores. They remember milestone purchases. They remember hopeful faces. She smiled at first. Then she looked at my expression and the smile softened. I told her plans had changed and asked what my options were. Technically, the return window had passed, but the ring was still in excellent condition, and after a short conversation with the manager, they offered me store credit or a partial refund. I took the refund. The woman processed everything carefully, almost gently, like she understood that some transactions deserve quiet. When she handed me the receipt, I folded it once and slipped it into my bag. The whole conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. When I walked back out to the truck, I sat behind the wheel for a second without turning the engine on. 5 months earlier, I had stood in that same area, imagining Ethan's face when I proposed we spend the rest of our lives choosing each other. Now, the financial part of that promise was already undone. There was something brutally clean about that. That evening, Ethan came home in an unusually good mood. He was carrying a paper bag from his favorite sandwich place and talking before he even finished taking off his jacket. Halfway through the story, he laughed and said, almost as an afterthought, that Gabriella had stopped by near his office earlier. Funny thing, he said, pulling food out onto the counter. One of my coworkers thought she and I were still together. He laughed again. Then he looked right at me. Guess some people still think we make sense. The sentence hung there, light on the surface, ugly underneath. He wanted a reaction, maybe irritation, maybe hurt, maybe another chance to act amused and superior while I tried to explain why the remark bothered me. Instead, I opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and said, "Hope that made your day interesting." He blinked, just slightly, not enough to reveal much, but enough that I knew my lack of reaction unsettled him more than anger would have. He recovered quickly, of course. That was another Ethan trait. He never sat in discomfort long. He edited himself in real time. Still, I saw it. That little flicker, that little pause. For the first time in a long time, he couldn't quite read me. Good. By the end of that week, nearly every wedding plan that mattered had been quietly erased. The date wasn't being held. The vendors were no longer ours. The ring was financially resolved. All that remained was the practical ending. And practical endings are where people like me do our best work. Because love may be emotional, but leaving often comes down to logistics. The apartment was the next thing I thought about. I'd signed the lease before Ethan and I met. When he moved in a year and a half ago after his old place got too expensive, it felt simple, easy even. We split costs. We built routines. He brought his clothes, his books, his expensive cologne, his coffee mugs that somehow always ended up in the sink. But legally, the apartment was still mine. That mattered. Not because I wanted power over him, because I knew I would need a clean ending, and clean endings depend on facts more than feelings. The opportunity came the following Tuesday. Ethan had a long day planned. Meetings, a client lunch, some networking thing afterward. He mentioned it the night before while scrolling through his phone, barely looking at me. I nodded and asked what time he'd be home. "Probably late," he said. "Don't wait up." He said it casually, but something about the phrase struck me. Don't wait up. As if I still was. As if I were still living in that version of the relationship where I measured my evenings around him. That night I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the faint streetlight shadows on the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me. Not with grief, with recognition. The man next to me still believed he had time. He still believed I would keep absorbing every insult as long as he wrapped it in charm. He still believed he could keep Gabriella orbiting our relationship and call me immature for noticing. He still believed I was staying. By morning, I was done waiting for him to find out he was wrong. I took the day off work on Tuesday. Ethan left early, moving through the apartment with the same casual confidence he always had. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other, already half focused on whatever conversation he was planning to have that day. He kissed my cheek on his way out, distracted, automatic. Long day, he said. I'll text you later. I nodded. The door closed behind him, and just like that, the apartment was quiet. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence settle. No background music, no conversation, no subtle tension sitting underneath everything like it had been for months. Just stillness. I made coffee out of habit, then sat at the kitchen table with the mug in both hands, letting the heat seep into my fingers, not thinking about whether I should do this. That part was already decided. Just thinking about the order of things. No drama, just steps. After a few minutes, I stood up and walked to the storage closet. There were a few empty moving boxes folded flat against the back wall. I pulled them out, set them on the floor, and started assembling them one by one. The sound of cardboard snapping into shape echoed lightly through the apartment. It felt final. I started in the bedroom. Ethan's side of the closet was easy to separate. His shirts hung in a neat row. Button-downs, jackets, a few pieces he liked to wear when he wanted to look more polished than usual. I took them down one at a time, folding them carefully. Not out of sentiment, out of habit. I've always believed if something needs to be done, you do it properly. His shoes came next. Lined up near the bottom of the closet, I placed them side by side in one of the boxes, his watch case from the dresser, his belts, the small tray where he kept his cufflinks. Each item had a place. Each item went into a box. No hesitation, no second guessing, just movement. In the bathroom, I gathered his things from the counter. Toothbrush, razor. That expensive cologne he used sparingly but always made sure I noticed. A few skincare products he insisted were necessary. I paused for half a second when I picked up the cologne bottle, not because I felt anything, because I remembered how he used to spray it before going out, then ask, "Too much?" And I would always say no, even when it was. I placed it in the box and closed the lid. The living room took longer. His laptop charger draped over the side of the couch. The books he claimed he was reading but never finished. The extra blanket he used when he stayed up late, watching something on his own. The small details of a shared life, reduced to objects. By late morning, I had 6 boxes lined up near the front door. Everything was packed neatly. Nothing thrown in carelessly, nothing damaged. If someone had walked in, it would have looked less like a breakup and more like a quiet, organized move. Which in a way it was. The last step required a short drive. I grabbed my keys, loaded the boxes into the back of my truck, and took one last look at the apartment before leaving. It already felt lighter, not empty, just clearer. Ethan had mentioned Gabriella's place enough times that I knew exactly where to go. A townhouse complex about 15 minutes away on the east side of the city. He'd talked about it casually. Coffee nearby. Parking being annoying. The way the sunlight hit her windows in the afternoon. Details he probably didn't realize he was giving me. Or maybe he didn't think I would ever use them. The drive was quiet. No music. Just the sound of the engine and the occasional turn signal clicking as I moved through familiar streets. When I pulled into the complex, I parked near the entrance and sat there for a second. Not to reconsider. Just to acknowledge what I was about to do. Then I got out of the truck. Gabriella answered the door. She looked exactly like I expected. Put together. Slightly surprised to see me. That kind of expression people have when something doesn't fit the version of reality they've been told. Her eyes dropped briefly to the boxes behind me, then back to my face. There was a pause. Short. Uncomfortable. I broke it. Hi, I said calmly. Ethan's things are in the truck. Confusion flickered across her face. What? I kept my tone even. He'll probably be staying here for a while, I continued. I thought it would be easier if his things were already here. For a second, she just stared at me, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. It wasn't. I stepped aside slightly and gestured toward the truck. Everything's packed. Clothes, personal stuff, essentials. Nothing's missing. She blinked again, slower this time. Wait, did something happen? I considered the question for a fraction of a second. Then I said, it's already handled, which was the truth. Within 20 minutes, every box was inside her entryway. She didn't stop me, didn't argue, didn't really know how to respond. And honestly, that made sense. For months, she had existed as a quiet presence in my relationship. A name, a comparison, a constant reference point. Now she was standing in the middle of its ending. Real, involved, whether she wanted to be or not. When the last box was set down, I stepped back toward the door. Thanks, I said simply. She looked like she wanted to ask more questions. But she didn't, not yet. I turned and walked back to my truck. No rush, no hesitation. Just the steady rhythm of footsteps on pavement. The drive home felt shorter, lighter. When I walked back into the apartment, the difference was immediate. The air felt still, clean. Not physically different, but emotionally. Ethan's presence had always filled space in a way that was hard to describe. Not loud, not overwhelming, just constant. Like a background noise you don't notice until it stops. Now it had stopped. I set my keys on the counter and sat back down at the kitchen table. There were still a few hours before he would come home. Nothing left to prepare. Nothing left to organize. Everything that mattered was already done. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for something to happen. I already knew exactly how it would go. Ethan got home a little after 3 o'clock that afternoon. I heard his car pull into the lot before I saw him. The familiar sound of the engine cutting off. The car door closing. His footsteps moving toward the building like any other day. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, hands folded loosely around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The door unlocked. He stepped inside, pushing it open with his shoulder, still half looking down at his phone. The place smells weirdly empty without... He stopped. The sentence didn't finish. It took about 3 seconds. That was all it took for something in his expression to shift. His eyes moved from the kitchen, to the entryway, to the space where his shoes should have been. Gone. He frowned slightly, like he was trying to place what felt off. Then he looked at the chair. No jacket. No bag. He turned slowly. Did you clean or something? His tone was casual, still assuming there was a normal explanation. I didn't answer. I just watched him. That was when he walked past me toward the bedroom. I stayed where I was, counting the seconds in my head without meaning to. 5, 7, 10. Then I heard the closet door slide open. Silence. Then another sound. Faster this time. Movement. Drawers opening, closing. His footsteps came back quicker. When he reappeared in the living room, his face had changed. Not angry yet. Just confused. Ella, he said, sharper now. Where are my things? I met his eyes. Delivered. The word landed between us. He blinked. Delivered. Where? Gabriella's place. For a moment, he just stared at me, like his brain needed a second to catch up. Then everything hit at once. What? The word came out louder than anything he'd said so far. Why would you? What is this? He gestured vaguely around the apartment. Some kind of joke? I let him finish. Let the confusion spill into irritation. Let him search for a version of the situation that still made sense to him. When he stopped talking, I spoke. Calm. Even. You made it clear Gabriella is still an important part of your life, I said. And you also made it clear you don't see me as someone you'd actually marry. His expression tightened. That's not what So I handled both things, I continued, not raising my voice. Your belongings are already somewhere you're comfortable being. And the wedding plans were canceled earlier this week. That was the moment something shifted in him. Not understanding. Not yet. But the first crack in his certainty. What do you mean canceled? He asked. I mean the venue is no longer reserved. The photographer isn't booked. The caterer's off the list. There's no wedding. I watched the information settle. Slowly. Unevenly. Like he didn't quite believe it. You're being serious right now? He asked. Yes. For the first time since he walked in, he looked genuinely caught off guard. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Just off balance. It lasted maybe 15 seconds. Then the anger came. Sharp. Fast. Are you out of your mind? He snapped. You packed up my entire life and dropped it at my ex's house while I was at work? I didn't move. Nothing about this was sudden, I said. We had a conversation a few nights ago. You told me exactly how you see me. His jaw tightened. That was a joke. Was it? Yes, he said immediately. Normal people don't cancel weddings over sarcasm, Ella. You're overreacting. There it was. The pattern. Rewrite the moment. Minimize the impact. Shift the blame. For a second, I almost felt something familiar. That old instinct to explain myself. To justify why something hurt. But it passed just as quickly. Because I wasn't inside that version of the relationship anymore. To him, it was a joke. To me, it was information. I stood up slowly. The wedding is already canceled, I said. The ring's been returned. And the apartment, I glanced around briefly, is mine. That was when his eyes flicked to my hands, then to the counter, then back to me. The ring, he repeated. I handled it. He stared at me like he was trying to find something unstable in my expression. Something emotional. Something he could push against. There wasn't anything there. Just certainty. His anger shifted again. Now it had an edge of desperation underneath it. This is about Gabriella, he said. You're doing all this because you're jealous. I let him talk. Let him build the argument he was used to winning. I told you 100 times she's just a friend, he continued. Confident people don't panic over things like that. When he stopped, I took a step toward the door. Then I opened it. The sound of it clicking open was louder than anything else in the room. He frowned. What are you doing? The conversation's over, I said. He looked at the open door, then back at me. You're serious right now? Yes. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he laughed, short, incredulous. You can't just kick me out, he said. We're engaged. We're not. The words came out clean. No hesitation. No emotion. The engagement ended when the wedding was canceled, I added. Everything else just caught up. He tried another angle. I pay half the rent, he said. I live here too. I'll transfer your portion for the rest of the month back to you, I replied. You won't lose anything. That stopped him. Not completely. But enough, because there wasn't much left to argue with. The logistics were already handled. The decisions were already made. All he had left was disbelief. He looked around the apartment again, at the empty spaces where his things used to be, at the door still open, at me, waiting. Finally, he grabbed his bag from the chair. The only thing left that was his. He slung it over his shoulder, slower this time, less confident, more aware. When he reached the doorway, he stopped, turned back. You're going to regret this, he said, once you calm down. I nodded. Gabriella's place is 15 minutes away, I said. The drive should be easy. That was the moment it clicked. Fully. Not just that he had to leave, but that I wasn't chasing after him. Not arguing. Not asking him to stay. Just done. He stepped outside. I closed the door behind him. And just like that, the apartment went quiet. The silence after the door closed wasn't dramatic. It didn't echo. It didn't feel heavy. It just settled. Like something that had been out of place for a long time had finally been removed. I stood there for a second, my hand still resting lightly on the door. Then I turned, walked back to the kitchen, and poured myself another cup of coffee. Same mug, same table, same seat. But everything felt different. Not bigger. Not smaller. Just mine. For the first time in months, there was no underlying tension in the air. No waiting for a comment that would need to be decoded. No quiet irritation I had to keep explaining away to myself. just stillness. About 20 minutes later, my phone started vibrating. Ethan. I glanced at the screen. Let it ring. It stopped, then started again and again. By the fourth call, he switched to messages. I picked up the phone, unlocked it, and read them one by one. Are you serious right now? Ella, open the door. We need to talk like adults. Stop being ridiculous. This isn't funny. I set the phone back down without replying. A few minutes later, another message came through. Longer this time. He said he hadn't meant what he said the other night, that it was sarcasm, that I was twisting it into something it wasn't. I read it, didn't respond. Then another message. This one was different. Apparently, he had made it to Gabriella's place. He'd seen the boxes. All of them. Exactly where I left them. I can't believe you dragged her into this, the message read. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I let out a quiet breath. Not quite a laugh, but close. For months, he had been the one keeping her present in our relationship, mentioning her, comparing, normalizing her place in his life while dismissing my discomfort. But now it was embarrassing. Because now he was the one standing in her doorway trying to explain something he didn't understand. Another message came in. She's asking questions I don't even know how to answer. That part didn't surprise me. Ethan was good at controlling narratives, but only when he had time to shape them. This had happened too fast for him to prepare. The messages kept coming. Some angry, some defensive. A few trying to sound reasonable. Well, we can fix this. You're overreacting. Let's just sit down and talk. Then one more. This just proves what I said. You're not ready for marriage. Mature people don't run away from problems. I stared at that message for a few seconds. Then I locked the phone and placed it face down on the table. From my perspective, the conversation had already happened. He told me exactly how he saw me, and I responded. Later that evening, around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. Different name this time. Gabriella. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how things were going over there. I hesitated for a second. Then opened the message. Hi, I think we need to talk. Ethan showed up with boxes and a story that doesn't make sense. I read it once. Then again, there was no hostility in her tone. Just confusion. Maybe a little discomfort. Which made sense. She hadn't been part of the relationship. Not officially. But she had been close enough to it that now she was standing in the middle of its ending. I thought about ignoring it. But unlike Ethan, she hadn't done anything directly to me. As far as I could tell, most of the dynamic came from him keeping her present in ways that benefited him. So I replied. Short, clear. The engagement is over. He'll probably need somewhere to stay for a bit. His things are already there. She responded a few minutes later. Did this happen because of me? I looked at the question, considered it, then typed. No, it happened because of how he sees the relationship. That was the truth. A few minutes passed. Then one last message from her. I didn't know things were like that. I didn't respond, because there was nothing else to add. Around 10 minutes later, Ethan called again. This time I turned my phone off. Not out of anger, just finality. The next morning, I turned it back on while sitting at the same kitchen table. 12 missed calls. More messages than I felt like counting. I made coffee first, then read them slowly. The tone had changed overnight. The anger was gone, replaced by something else. Justifications, explanations. I didn't mean it like that. You know how I joke. You're blowing this out of proportion. Then, toward the end, a shift. Let's meet and talk. We can fix this. Don't throw away 3 years over one sentence. I read that last one twice, then set the phone down. A few minutes later, another message came through. Short. Gabriella said she's not comfortable being in the middle of this. I can stay a couple nights, but that's it. That made sense. He had spent months treating her like a harmless background detail. Now she was setting boundaries, because now it was real. I took a sip of coffee, then finally typed a response. The wedding is canceled. The engagement is over. Your things are already somewhere safe. I'll transfer the remaining rent back to you today. The message sent. A few seconds later, the typing indicator appeared. Then his reply, You're ending a 3-year relationship over one sarcastic sentence? I looked at the screen, thought about it, then answered honestly. It's not about one sentence, it's about what it revealed. I paused, then added one more line. You told me exactly how you see me. I just believed you. I watched the message deliver, waited. His reply came quickly, but I didn't open it. Instead, I blocked the number, set the phone down, and finished my coffee in silence. The apartment stayed quiet, not empty, not lonely, just clear. For the first time since the engagement started, my life made sense again.